After cooking a dinner for 14 relatives, my wife's brother slapped me on the back and said, "Every family needs a punchline. Thanks for making the rest of us look like winners." My daughter nearly choked on her drink, laughing, and said, "Dad's like a wet paper towel." My wife leaned back in her chair, smirked, and said, "Honestly, he's more like a Roomba. Quiet, programmable, and only useful when there's a mess." They all laughed while I smiled. Yesterday, my wife and her mother showed up crying at my door, begging me to talk. Throw away because my main account has too much identifying info. And well, this shit's about to get messy. So yesterday, my wife Stephanie and her mom Frances showed up at my apartment door, mascara running down their faces, begging me to talk. But to understand how we got there, we need to go back to last Saturday night when I finally realized I'd been the family's walking punchline for the past 15 years. I've always been the cook in our family. It's my thing, you know? While everyone else sits around scrolling through their phones, I'm in the kitchen prepping a four-course meal that takes literal days of planning. Not because anybody asked me to, but because I actually enjoy it. Or used to, anyway. Last weekend was my brother-in-law Nicholas's 45th birthday. I spent 3 days prepping this massive feast handmade pasta, slow-roasted prime rib, the good kind that costs more than my monthly streaming subscriptions combined, and this chocolate lava cake that would have made those cooking show judges weep. 14 people around our dining table, all of them stuffing their faces with food I'd been slaving over since Thursday. I was bringing out the last dish when Nicholas slapped me on the back, hard enough that some of the sauce sloshed over the rim of the serving bowl. That's when he said it, grinning at everyone around the table. "Every family needs a punchline. Thanks for making the rest of us look like winners." Everyone laughed. Not polite laughter, but the kind where people nearly choke on their drinks. Speaking of which, my 17-year-old daughter Josephine actually did, before adding her own little contribution. "Dad's like a wet paper towel." More laughter. Louder this time. But the real kicker? My wife of 15 years leaned back in her chair, this little smirk playing on her lips, and said, "Honestly, he's more like a Roomba. Quiet, programmable, and only useful when there's a mess." The table absolutely lost it. My mother-in-law Frances was wiping tears from her eyes. My nephew was pounding the table, and there I stood, still holding the sauce boat, with this frozen smile plastered on my face. Here's the thing about being the family punchline. You become so used to it happening that you stop registering it as wrong. It's just background noise. I've been hearing these jokes for so long that I'd convinced myself they were normal, just good-natured ribbing, the way families show affection. But something clicked that night. Maybe it was seeing my daughter join in so enthusiastically. Maybe it was the way Stephanie looked at me afterward, not even checking if I was okay with being the butt of the joke. Or maybe after 15 years, my give a damn finally broke. I finished serving dinner, smiled through dessert, nodded along to everyone's compliments about the food, in between their little jabs about how I'm basically a glorified kitchen appliance. I even loaded the dishwasher while they all moved to the living room to continue the party. That night, I lay awake next to my snoring wife, scrolling through my phone's gallery. Years of family photos, holidays where I cooked for days, birthdays where I made everyone's favorite dishes, anniversary dinners where I tried to recreate meals from special dates. And in every photo, this same stupid, hopeful smile on my face, like a dog, waiting for a pat on the head. I've never been the confrontational type. Stephanie always handled that side of things in our relationship. But at 3 in the morning, I made a decision. I was done being the punchline. Sunday morning, I got up early like always, made coffee, waited until Stephanie wandered into the kitchen in search of caffeine, told her I was going to the store for some things. She barely looked up from her phone. Instead of going to the store, I went to the bank, withdrew exactly half of our savings and checking accounts. Not a penny more. I'm not trying to be an AH here, just making a point. Then, I drove to my sister Heidi's place across town. Heidi's always been the only one who noticed how Stephanie and her family treat me. Last Christmas, she actually called Nicholas out when he made some comment about me being domesticated. Of course, everyone laughed it off as Heidi being overly sensitive, but I remember the look she gave me. Pity mixed with frustration. Like, why do you let them talk to you this way? I didn't have a good answer then. I do now. After explaining the situation to Heidi, she immediately offered her guest room. I accepted, but only temporarily. By afternoon, I'd found a month-to-month rental apartment. Nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom with a decent kitchen. Signed the papers digitally and paid first/last/security, all from my new separate account. The only thing I left at home was a note on the kitchen counter. Find someone else to be your punchline. Then I turned off notifications on my phone. By evening, I had 47 missed calls and texts. 23 from Stephanie, 15 from my daughter, the rest from various in-laws. I only responded to one, from my daughter. with, "I love you, but I need some space right now. We'll talk soon." Monday morning, I called my friend Austin. He's been through a nasty divorce himself and knows the ropes. Met him for breakfast, where he gave me a crash course in separation 101. Document everything. Don't spend joint money frivolously. Don't badmouth the other parent to your kid. Basic stuff, but important. I took the week off from work, citing family emergency. Technically not a lie. Then I spent Monday setting up new accounts, transferring auto payments for my personal expenses, and canceling joint subscriptions. Sorry, Netflix, but Stephanie can get her own account if she wants to keep watching those true crime documentaries she loves so much. Tuesday was when my mother-in-law Frances started calling. I let it go to voicemail the first 6 times. The 7th, I finally listened. "James, please, this is ridiculous. Whatever happened, I'm sure we can work it out as a family." Stephanie is beside herself. Josephine doesn't understand why her father would just abandon them. "Please call me back." Abandon them? After 15 years of cooking, cleaning, and being the designated family punching bag? That's rich. Instead of calling back, I spent the evening compiling a document. Screenshots of text conversations where Stephanie belittled me. Photos from events, where I was clearly excluded from family activities after handling all the preparation. Notes from therapy sessions I'd attended alone, trying to figure out why I never felt respected in my own home. Wednesday morning, I emailed this document to Frances, Nicholas, and a few other key family members who had been at the dinner. Subject line: "Why I left a 15-year overview." No one called for hours after that went out. Then my phone exploded again. "Nicholas, dude, it was just a joke. Don't be so sensitive." Frances: "I had no idea you felt this way. We need to talk in person." Stephanie: "How dare you air our private business to my entire family? This is so embarrassing." Notice what's missing there? Any actual apology. By Thursday, Stephanie had apparently figured out I wasn't coming back with my tail between my legs. Her tone changed completely. Suddenly it was all, "I miss you so much. I never realized how much you do around here." Josephine and I had cereal for dinner last night because neither of us knows how to cook anything decent. Too little, too late. But I'll admit, part of me felt a sick satisfaction knowing they were struggling without their personal chef punching bag. Friday morning, I met with Austin again, this time to discuss more formal separation terms. Nothing final, just a framework to start from. Something to show I was serious. He drafted papers that were, let's say, not particularly favorable to Stephanie. Not unfair, just realistic about who actually kept our household running all these years. That night, I got a tearful voicemail from Stephanie about how she just got declined trying to use our joint credit card at the grocery store. Apparently, she'd never bothered to notice I'd been paying that bill all along. Welcome to reality, hun. By Saturday, exactly 1 week after the infamous dinner, I was actually feeling better than I had in years, like I'd finally stood up for myself. Heidi came over to my new place and I cooked her dinner. Nothing fancy, just some pasta carbonara and a simple salad. But as we ate, she raised her glass and said, "To my brother, who finally realized his worth." I almost cried right into my pasta. Sunday morning, my doorbell rang. There they were, Stephanie and Frances, mascara streaked down their faces, practically falling over themselves to talk to me. Turns out, a week without your personal Roomba can really change your perspective. But that's just the beginning of this story. Update 1. First off, holy crap. Didn't expect my post to blow up like this. RIP my inbox. Thanks for all the awards and supportive comments. Some of you are seriously ready to throw hands for me. And while I appreciate the sentiment, let's not advocate for violence. Yeah? For those asking if this is real, unfortunately, yes. I wish I had the creativity to make this shit up. So when we left off, Stephanie and Frances were standing at my apartment door on Sunday morning, looking like they'd just watched the finale of that show where everyone's favorite character dies. I hadn't planned what I'd do when they inevitably tracked me down. Part of me wanted to shut the door in their faces, the petty part that's been growing steadily over the past week. But I'm still me, even if I'm not their doormat anymore. I let them in. My apartment is nothing fancy, just a basic one-bedroom with kitchen appliances from when flip phones were still cool. Frances looked around like she'd accidentally wandered into a trap house. Stephanie just kept wiping her eyes with this crumpled tissue that had clearly reached maximum capacity about 20 minutes ago. I offered them water because I'm not a complete monster. Also, I had literally nothing else to offer. My fridge contained exactly 3 eggs, some butter, half a block of cheese, and a 6-pack. Bachelor life, am I right? Though technically I'm still married, so separated guy life? Frances started with the classic. "We've been so worried about you," which really means, "We've been inconvenienced by your absence." I just nodded and waited. One thing about being the quiet guy in a family of talkers, you get really good at uncomfortable silences. It took approximately 45 seconds before Stephanie cracked. She launched into this whole speech about how she never meant to hurt me, how the jokes were just their family's way of showing love, how she didn't realize I took them so seriously. Standard gaslighting 101. I've heard variations of this so many times over the years that I could practically recite it along with her. When she finished, I asked her one question. If Nicholas had said those things about you, would you have laughed? The look on her face was priceless. Like I'd just asked her to explain quantum physics while juggling flaming chainsaws. Frances jumped in then, talking about how families have different dynamics and how I've always been so sensitive, and maybe I'd misunderstood the intention behind the comments. Classic Frances move, rewriting reality to make her family the heroes of every story. I pulled out my phone and played back the recording from that night. Yeah, I recorded it. Not the whole dinner, just the James is basically a household appliance portion. Call it a moment of clarity in the fog of humiliation. I'd started recording after Nicholas's initial comment, just, I don't know. Instinct, maybe? Or maybe some part of me knew I'd need evidence later when they tried to minimize what happened. Hearing those comments played back in their own voices with the laughter so clear and cruel, it hit different. Stephanie's face went through this whole journey from defensive to shocked to genuinely ashamed. Frances just stared at the floor like it might open up and swallow her. When the recording finished, I told them I'd been compiling similar moments for years. Not intentionally at first, but as someone who gets dismissed regularly, you start keeping receipts, screenshots of text messages, old emails, even a few handwritten notes from birthdays and anniversaries that seemed sweet on the surface, but had these little digs embedded in them. My personal favorite? Happy birthday to the man who proves that even kitchen skills can't make up for a lack of ambition. Charming, right? That's when Stephanie dropped the first bomb. Nicholas had been at their house every night that week, telling her I was having some kind of midlife crisis and would be back once I remembered which side my bread was buttered on. Apparently, he'd also been coaching Josephine to ice me out, telling her that men sometimes need to throw little tantrums to feel important. The second bomb, Nicholas was in serious financial trouble, like about to lose his house kind of trouble. Turns out Mr. Successful had been making some questionable investments and was leveraged up to his eyeballs. His wife didn't even know. The only reason Stephanie knew was because he'd asked to borrow money, a lot of money, just 2 days before. Part of me felt bad for him, a smaller part than you might expect. I asked Stephanie what exactly she wanted from me. Was she here to actually apologize or just to get me to come home and resume my role as the family's emotional punching bag slash personal chef? She started crying again, but not the manipulative tears I was used to seeing when she didn't get her way. These seemed different, rawer somehow. She admitted that she'd never really had to think about how her words affected me because I never pushed back. That seeing that compilation of evidence I'd sent to everyone had been like suddenly seeing herself through a stranger's eyes, and she didn't like what she saw. Frances was quieter but nodded along. Then she said something that actually shocked me. I've watched my daughter treat you exactly how my husband treated me for 40 years, and I never said anything because I thought that's just how marriages work. Well, damn. I'd like to say I immediately forgave them and we had a group hug. But that's not how real life works. I told them I needed time, that I wasn't coming home right away, if at all, that if there was any chance of salvaging our relationship, we'd need counseling. Not just Stephanie and me, but family counseling with Josephine too. They left looking shell-shocked, but I think with a new understanding of the situation. That was Sunday. Monday brought its own drama. I was just heating up a sad frozen lunch at work when Nicholas appeared in the break room like some kind of badly dressed apparition. How he got past building security, I'll never know. He pulled the man-to-man routine, talking about how families have rough patches and real men don't walk out when things get tough. Rich, coming from a guy who, according to Stephanie, was hiding major financial problems from his own wife. I waited until he finished his little speech, then asked how his investment portfolio was doing these days. The color drained from his face faster than water down a broken drain. He started stuttering something about confidential family matters. I just smiled and told him I'd be happy to discuss my marriage with him, right after he explained to his clients why he'd been moving their money into high-risk ventures without proper disclosure. I didn't actually know if this was true, but based on his reaction, I'd hit pretty close to the mark. He left without another word, but apparently he went straight to Frances to complain about how I'd threatened him. I hadn't. Facts aren't threats. Tuesday, I got my first text from Josephine that wasn't dripping with teenage disdain. She asked if we could meet for coffee over the weekend. Just to talk. No promises, she said, but she'd been thinking about some things. Progress, I guess. Wednesday was when the financial reality really started hitting Stephanie. She called, I let it go to voicemail, saying she'd been declined trying to use the credit card at the grocery store for the second time. Apparently, she'd never bothered to notice I'd been handling all the bills for years. Welcome to adulting, babe. Thursday, Austin, my friend who's been helping me navigate this mess, brought over the formal separation papers. They weren't vindictive. I'm not trying to leave Stephanie destitute, but they were fair. Equal split of assets, but acknowledging my contributions to the household beyond just financial. Also included a detailed accounting of all the emotional labor I'd been providing. Cooking, cleaning, managing Josephine's school and social calendar, maintaining relationships with both sides of the family, etc. Austin suggested I hold off sending them for a few days. Let the reality of the situation marinate a bit longer. Like a good steak, some things improve with time. See? Food metaphors. Can't help myself. Friday night was Josephine's lacrosse game. I'd never missed one before, and it felt strange not to be there, cheering awkwardly from the sidelines while trying not to embarrass her with my existence. Instead, I sent a delivery of her favorite post-game snacks with a simple note. Proud of you always. Love, Dad. Austin went to the game, his daughter plays for the same team, and reported back that Stephanie, Francis, and Nicholas were all there looking miserable. Josephine scored twice but didn't celebrate with them after. Small victories. The weekend brought another unexpected development. Nicholas's wife called me. We've never been close. She always seemed to share her husband's view of me as the family joke, but she sounded desperate. Apparently, Nicholas had been hiding their financial situation for years, and my comment at work had prompted her to do some digging. She found statements hidden in his home office, showing they were on the brink of losing everything. I felt bad for her. Unlike me, she genuinely had no idea what was happening in her marriage. I suggested she talk to a financial advisor and possibly a lawyer, not to be malicious, but because she needed to protect herself. By Sunday, 2 weeks since the dinner that changed everything, something shifted. Stephanie stopped calling to beg me to come home and started asking what she could do to make things right. Francis sent an email, an actual email, not a text, with a detailed apology that showed she'd really been reflecting on her role in enabling the family dynamic. Even Nicholas's wife texted to thank me for the advice. She'd frozen their joint accounts just before Nicholas tried to empty them. The biggest surprise came from Josephine. She showed up at my apartment Sunday afternoon, alone. No warning, just a text from downstairs. I'm here. Can we talk? She looked smaller somehow, standing in my doorway. Less like the confident teenager who'd laughed at me being compared to a Roomba, and more like the little girl who used to fall asleep on my chest watching nature documentaries. Our conversation wasn't easy. There were tears, mostly hers, some mine, accusations, fair ones, and eventually, a genuine apology. She admitted she'd been treating me the way she saw everyone else treat me, like I was disposable, unimportant. She said she'd started seeing the school counselor and talking about how she treats people, especially me. Then she asked the question that broke my heart and gave me hope simultaneously. Do you think you'll ever come home, Dad? I told her the truth. I don't know. But I do know I'll never again be the family punching bag. As she was leaving, she turned back and said, Mom's moving in with Grandma Frances tomorrow. She can't afford the house without you. Thought you should know. And that brings us to yesterday, Monday. 3 weeks since everything changed. I was just getting home from work when my phone buzzed with a text from Stephanie. We need to talk. For real this time. No crying, no excuses, just talk. I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop, neutral territory. What she told me there changed everything yet again. But that's going to have to wait for part 3 because this is already way longer than I intended, and my frozen dinner is starting to smell like it's burning. Thanks for listening, Reddit. Sometimes the family punchline gets the last laugh after all. Finally, update. Thanks for all the support, awards, and comments on my previous posts. NGL, reading some of your suggestions for revenge has been both hilarious and slightly concerning. Y'all need therapy. So do I. But that's beside the point. So when I left off, I was about to meet Stephanie at a coffee shop after she'd texted asking to talk for real. I chose this place downtown that makes these ridiculous cinnamon rolls the size of your face. Not because I wanted to treat Stephanie, but because if the conversation went south, at least I'd have sugar to comfort me. Emotional eating. FTW. I got there 15 minutes early because punctuality is hardwired into my DNA at this point. Ordered my usual black coffee that tastes like they filtered it through an old boot, just how I like it, and grabbed a corner table where I could see the door. Stephanie walked in 5 minutes late, standard, but something was off. First, she wasn't wearing any makeup, which I've seen maybe 3 times in our entire marriage. Second, she was carrying a manila folder thick enough to be someone's dissertation. Third, she looked nervous. Stephanie doesn't do nervous. She does confident, irritated, or passionate. Nervous is new territory. She sat down without ordering anything, which was another red flag. This woman normally can't function without her overpriced cappuccino. She placed the folder on the table between us, took a deep breath, and said 6 words I never thought I'd hear from her. I think I need help, James. Not, we need to talk about you coming home. Not, the family misses you. Not even, I'm sorry for everything. But an admission that she, personally, needed help. The folder contained printouts of therapists in our area who specialize in family counseling. She'd already made an appointment for herself. Just herself. Not couples therapy, not family therapy. Individual therapy for Stephanie. She told me she'd spent the past week really thinking about our marriage, about how she treated me, about the example she was setting for Josephine. She admitted something that hit me like a truck. She'd always resented that I seemed content with my life while she was constantly striving for more, more, more. My happiness with simple things made her feel inadequate somehow, so she'd developed this habit of putting me down to make herself feel better. It wasn't an excuse, she said, just a realization she'd had while lying awake at 3 in the morning on Frances's pull-out couch that smells vaguely of mothballs and disappointment. I asked her why now. Why, after 15 years of treating me like the family doormat, was she suddenly having this epiphany? Her answer was surprisingly honest. Because you finally stood up for yourself, and it terrified me. She'd never considered I might actually leave. In her mind, I was the stable one, the constant, the one who would always be there no matter how they treated me. My leaving shattered her entire worldview. There was more to the conversation, 2 hours worth actually, but the gist was this. Stephanie wanted to change, wanted to work on herself, wanted to work on our marriage if I was willing, but she understood if I wasn't. I told her I needed to think about it, that therapy was a good start, but I wasn't ready to move back home yet, that I'd need to see consistent change, not just promises. She nodded and slid the folder toward me. Inside, beyond the therapist info, was a stack of papers I recognized. The separation agreement Austin had helped me draft. She'd signed it, every page. At the bottom of the last page, she'd handwritten, I hope we never need this, but I understand why you do. That was Monday. Tuesday brought another surprise. A text from Nicholas. Need to talk. My office. 2 p.m. My first instinct was to tell him where to shove his request, but curiosity got the better of me. I agreed, but set my own terms. We'd meet at the coffee shop near my work, not his office where he'd have home field advantage. Nicholas showed up looking like he'd aged 10 years in 3 weeks. The expensive watch was gone. So was the designer polo. He was wearing a regular button-down with a coffee stain on the cuff. He got straight to the point. His financial house of cards was collapsing. 3 clients had pulled their business after hearing rumors about his investment strategies, which, to be clear, I never actually spread. People talk, especially when money's involved. His wife had frozen their accounts and was staying with her sister, and Frances had refused to bail him out because, and this was the kicker, she'd decided it was time he faced consequences for once in his life. I almost choked on my coffee. Nicholas didn't apologize for how he'd treated me over the years. Not directly. But he did admit that he'd always been jealous of my relationship with Stephanie. Not in a weird way, but because she and I had something stable while his own marriage had been built on appearances and materialism. Then he asked if I'd talk to his wife, put in a good word, tell her he was trying to change. The irony was delicious. Better than the cinnamon roll I'd stress-eaten the day before. The family joke was now the family mediator. I told him I'd consider it if he agreed to 2 conditions. First, he had to publicly apologize for his comment at the dinner. Second, he had to get his financial shit together and be honest with his wife about everything. He agreed so quickly, I almost felt bad for him. Almost. Wednesday, Josephine texted asking if she could come over after school. She'd become a regular visitor to my sad little apartment, usually bringing homework or college application essays for me to review. This time, she brought something else. A counseling pamphlet from school. She'd been talking to the guidance counselor about her behavior toward me and wanted my perspective on some things they'd discussed. We had this really raw conversation about family dynamics and respect, about how kids often model the behavior they see from other adults, about how my silence over the years had inadvertently taught her that it was okay to treat me like a second-class citizen in my own home. She asked if I thought she was a bad person. God, that broke me. I told her the truth, that she's one of the best people I know, just young and still figuring things out. That making mistakes doesn't make you bad. Refusing to learn from them does. Before she left, she mentioned that Stephanie had been different lately, quieter, more reflective. She'd caught her mom crying while looking at old family photos the night before. Progress, I guess. Thursday was Thanksgiving. Yeah, that Thanksgiving. The one I'd been planning for months before everything imploded. The one I usually spent 3 days cooking for while everyone else watched football and complained that dinner wasn't ready yet. I'd completely forgotten about it until Frances called Wednesday night asking what our plans were, as if there was still a collective hour that included me. I told her I didn't have plans, that I figured they'd handle Thanksgiving without me this year. There was a long pause before she said something that actually made me set down my TV dinner fork. What if we cooked for you this year? I laughed. I couldn't help it. The idea of Frances, Stephanie, and Josephine attempting to cook a Thanksgiving meal was like imagining three cats trying to build IKEA furniture. Technically possible, but guaranteed chaos. But Frances was serious. She admitted they'd been looking up recipes online, watching cooking videos, and even practiced making mashed potatoes, which apparently turned out a bit chunky but edible. The thought was both touching and hilarious. I agreed with one condition. We'd do it at my apartment, not the house. Neutral territory still felt important. They showed up Thursday morning with grocery bags full of ingredients, none of which matched any traditional Thanksgiving recipe I'd ever seen. Stephanie had printed out step-by-step instructions with pictures. Josephine had downloaded some cooking app that yells at you if you're doing things wrong. Her words, not mine. I sat at my tiny kitchen table, sipping coffee, watching them navigate my limited kitchen space like a chaotic cooking show. Frances kept asking where things were, forgetting I'd only been in this apartment for 3 weeks and barely had the essentials. Stephanie nearly set off the smoke alarm twice. Josephine was surprisingly competent with a knife, something I found both impressive and mildly concerning. I offered advice only when asked, which was frequently. By 3 in the afternoon, they had somehow produced a meal that was edible. The turkey was a bit dry on the outside, too pink near the bone. The stuffing was oddly sweet because Josephine misread tablespoon as teacup. Not even kidding. The green bean casserole was the most successful dish, mostly because it came from cans and was hard to mess up. But they'd tried. They'd really tried. As we sat down to eat, Frances raised her glass and said, "James, I want to apologize for years of watching how they treated you and saying nothing, for raising my daughter to think it was okay to belittle her partner, for not appreciating everything you've done for this family." Stephanie went next, her voice shaking slightly. "I'm sorry for taking you for granted, for making you the butt of jokes, for teaching Josephine that it was okay to disrespect you. I'm working on being better, and I hope someday you can forgive me." Josephine, always the dramatic one, had written her apology on her phone's notes app. "Dad, I'm sorry for laughing when Uncle Nicholas called you the family punchline. You're not a wet paper towel or a Roomba. You're the person who checks my homework and makes my lunch and remembers which medicines make me drowsy. You're my dad. And I was a jerk, and I'm really, really sorry. I'm not gonna lie." I teared up a bit. But before I could say anything, my doorbell rang. It was Nicholas, looking uncomfortable in a plain sweater, holding a bottle of wine. His wife was with him, which I hadn't expected. She gave me a small smile that seemed genuine. I invited them in, though the apartment was already cramped with 4 people. Nicholas looked at the slightly mangled turkey, the lumpy mashed potatoes, and the oddly sweet stuffing, then at me. He took a deep breath and said in front of everyone, "James, I'm sorry for the dinner comment, for years of treating you like you were less than me, for trying to turn your family against you when you finally stood up for yourself. I was wrong, and I'm trying to do better." His wife squeezed his hand, a silent show of support. Later, she told me that Nicholas had come clean about everything. Their financial situation, his treatment of me over the years, all of it. They were in counseling now, both couples and financial. They'd downsized their house and were on a strict budget. Nicholas was rebuilding his business the right way with her as an equal partner. We ate that imperfect Thanksgiving meal together. The conversation was stilted at times, genuine at others. Nicholas asked about my cooking techniques with actual interest, not mockery. Frances complimented my apartment sincerely. Stephanie helped with dishes without being asked. Small things, normal things, but they felt monumental. After everyone left, Stephanie lingered at the door. She asked if this changed anything, if I was ready to come home. I told her the truth, I wasn't sure yet, that I appreciated the effort everyone was making, but trust takes longer to rebuild than it does to break, that I was willing to try couples counseling, to see where things stood after a few sessions. She nodded, looking both disappointed and understanding. Then she asked if I'd help them with Christmas dinner, adding quickly, "Not to cook it for us, just to teach us how." I found myself saying yes before I'd even thought it through. That was a month ago. Since then, we've had 4 couples counseling sessions that have been in equal parts uncomfortable and enlightening. I've had dinner with Josephine twice a week, sometimes at my place, sometimes at restaurants. Nicholas and his wife are slowly rebuilding their financial life, and he hasn't made a single joke at my expense. Last weekend, I went to the house to pick up more of my things. It looked different somehow. Stephanie had rearranged the living room, replaced some of the artwork with photos I'd taken on our trips. The kitchen was cleaner than I'd left it. There was a meal plan on the fridge in Josephine's handwriting, with YouTube links for cooking instructions. Stephanie asked if I wanted to stay for dinner. She'd made lasagna following my recipe. It wasn't perfect. The noodles were a bit undercooked, the sauce a little watery, but she'd tried, really tried. I stayed. We talked about real things, not just schedules and bills, about what we both wanted from the relationship, from life, about where we'd gone wrong and how to do better. After dinner, as I was leaving, Stephanie asked if I'd consider coming home after the new year. Not as the family cook or emotional punching bag, but as her husband, Josephine's father, an equal partner. I told her I'd think about it, and I am. Seriously, yesterday was Christmas. I spent the morning at my sister Heidi's, then went to Francis's house for dinner, a dinner they cooked with minimal assistance from me. Nicholas and his wife were there, more subdued than in past years, but seemingly happier in a quieter way. After the meal, Nicholas raised his glass to James, who had the courage to walk away and the grace to let us try to make things right. Everyone raised their glasses. No one laughed at me. No one made a joke at my expense. Instead, they looked at me with something I'd rarely seen from them before. Respect. I don't know what happens next, whether I'll move back home or maintain my independence longer, whether Stephanie and I will fully reconcile or eventually decide to part ways more permanently, whether Nicholas will sustain his newfound humility or backslide into old habits. What I do know is this. I'm not the family punchline anymore, and that, more than any elaborate revenge scheme, feels like the ultimate victory.